Panic in South Africa as thousands of Zimbabweans face mass deportation. They're trying to beat a deadline to legalise their stay, but many won't make it. What does it mean for the migrants trying to escape Zimbabwe? And does South Africa really want them? This is Inside Story. Hello, a very warm welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. More than 1 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa face a New Year deadline to get government permits to stay in the country. Families who fled the political and economic chaos in Zimbabwe have been trying to build new lives in the richer neighbouring country. If they don't legalise their status by Friday night, they'll be forced back across the border. But with time running out, campaigners say thousands of Zimbabweans could be forcibly deported, and that could trigger a wave of violence. Adrian Finnegan has this report.
Zimbabwean immigrants desperate to secure their future. They say they fled economic turmoil and political violence back in 2008. South Africa's government said they could stay on, but now that permission is being withdrawn.
I can't afford the 2,000 rand for a new passport. I need it for my permit. I'm so stressed, and help at this place, there isn't any.
It's a familiar story of frustration. Most have faced long lines and a confusing process. The deadline is the 31st of December. And immigrants say, because of the relatively short period of time they had to fulfill certain requirements, many won't make it.
Once you go, how do you come back? We thought we were going to make it better by legalizing our stay, as like they said. But how legal is it legal when it is like this?
How does that make you feel?
It makes me bad, man. It makes me feel bad.
More than 100,000 Zimbabweans are thought to have applied for residency. But some estimates put the true number living there at more than 1 million. South Africa's government says it's safe for them to return and insists it's simply protecting its border.
The border jumpers, once this process is finished, they'll be arrested and sent to Zimbabwe, and they will never be allowed to come through here legally.
But with a new election looming in Zimbabwe, human rights activists say they'll be returning to the hardship they escaped in the first place. Adrian Finnegan, Al Jazeera.
So a lot of important issues to discuss. Joining me are my guests in Johannesburg, Shadrach Gutto. He's a professor of African Renaissance Studies at the University of South Africa. Also in Johannesburg, Michael Nyam-areb-vu from the Solidarity Peace Trust. And in Leeds, Daniel Hammett, lecturer in human geography at the University of Sheffield. A warm welcome to all three of you. Michael, first of all, let's start with you. Do we know how many Zimbabweans are in South Africa? Because the estimates seem to vary between a few 100,000 up to 3 million.
You are very right that estimates have been putting it at over 3 million. Civic Society has been estimating it at 3 million. And recently, when this documentation process started, estimates were putting it at 1.5 million. So it varies between 1.5 and 3 million.
And these people are doing what? They've all found temporary work, they're working as traders, what?
As you may be aware of the political situation in Zimbabwe, which also caused an economic downturn, people have had to run away from Zimbabwe for various reasons, but most of them ran away from political persecution. Now, this makes the bulk of our people who are here in South Africa, and as we go to regularize their stay here in South Africa, it is the bulk of these persecuted people who are coming up, most of whom do not even have papers at all, not even a birth certificate.
Because a lot of them don't have papers on them, and my figures are telling me that less than 125,000 Zimbabweans have managed to apply for this visa. Have they simply not been given enough time?
Talking of the time, there have always been calls for an extension for this exercise. But the South African government has been adamant, and they've stuck to the 31st of December 2010, which is today. And we have always been talking about the feasibility of this deadline. And we have argued that more time was required. But anyhow, with the little time that has been there, as you said, 125,000 have submitted their applications. This is a far off lower number than is expected. Like I said, estimates put the total number of Zimbabweans in South Africa between 1.5 million to 3 million. So this is an appalling kind of number. The turnout has been low, and the question is why. Now, this takes us back to where these people are coming from and why they came here. Like I said, most of them are political victims, and some, for security reasons, are not turning up for this process at all. They think that this process is out to dig them out and take them back to the persecutor. So this is one problem which has bedeviled this whole project.
Well, that's an interesting point. Daniel, what do you make of that? There seems to be a lot of chaos going on in South Africa. On the one hand, you have people who are trying to get their visas to stay. And on the other hand, as Michael is saying, a lot of people don't want to register because they do fear persecution.
Sure, I think Michael's got a very important point there. Let's take the political persecution angle first. It's clear that the mediation in South Africa, that the political situation there is still far from stable. And from what I know of civil society organisations in the UK as well who work with Zimbabwean exiles, there's a lot of concern over continued political persecution in Zimbabwe. So I'm not surprised by what Michael's saying. He also mentioned the speed with which, or the processing by the Department of Home Affairs. Now, that's been an ongoing issue for many years with the South African Department of Home Affairs in terms of a lack of capacity and a lack of efficiency to get visas not only to Zimbabweans but other visitors and people wanting to gain residency, which means there's always long queues at Home Affairs. And with the pressure that's been put on by the change from the 2009 amnesty policy to the current policy, that's putting a huge strain on which the Department of Home Affairs seems to be struggling to deal with.
Well, why has the Department of Home Affairs come out and said, because as you say, they did have this moratorium on deportations. What changed their mind? Is it because there is now a power-sharing government in Zimbabwe?
To be honest, the official line will be along that line. The other angles to it may be to do with dealing with the economic situation, with wanting to regularise not only people's residency but their tax status to increase the economic base. Other people would argue that it would be to do with getting a clear idea of the demographics and therefore where to target increased interventions in healthcare, in education, and other kinds of social service delivery. So there'll be a whole range of reasons. As to the actual reasons why, you'd have to speak to the Department of Home Affairs, I'm afraid. I can give you my opinion, but it obviously won't reflect what they're saying. OK, well, I wanted to bring Shadrach Gutto in at this point in Johannesburg, but I think we've temporarily lost the line to him. We are going to get that back. Michael, what's your understanding of what's going to happen to undocumented Zimbabweans? How are they going to handle this mass deportation exercise? Because it could become a very tense situation, couldn't it?
The Minister for Home Affairs has indicated that there is not going to be any mass deportations until this whole process comes to an end. And the question is, how far is this going to stretch? But anyhow, we are glad as civic society that she has given that assurance. But however, as civic society and as Solidarity Peace Trust, we are taking that statement lightly, and we don't want to hold on to it too much, because as we know, such exercises always lead to mass deportations. Such exercises always lead to harassments and arrests by the ordinary people, by the police. So we are taking that with a pinch of salt. But what we are also doing is to work hand in hand with the Home Affairs. The Solidarity Peace Trust has become a member of the Stakeholders Forum, a forum which was created to interface with the government and discuss issues surrounding the documentation which is in process. It's also a forum which tackles challenges hands-on. with all the authorities present. For example, the minister herself, her deputy, the DGs, the Home Affairs managers.
So you're liaising with these people, are you? Are you speaking to them about this?
They invited us, and we like I said, there was such a forum which was created, the Stakeholders Forum. Yes, we are interfacing, and we are also tackling some of the challenges on the ground so that there is a smooth running of this process.
Okay, because the reason I ask you, Michael, is that I'm wondering, I mean, call me a cynical old journalist, I'm wondering whether there is an ulterior motive by South African ministers in making this process so difficult. Is the reality that they are worried about absorbing so many Zimbabweans into society, into their society?
Now, I'm going to share with you the views from our people, because as the Solidarity Peace Trust, we work with the people, and I'm going to share with you their opinions. People have been very wary of this exercise, thinking that it's a dig-up process which will unearth them and expose them to the persecutor. Now, the whole exercise per se, as the people view it, has been genuine, by and large. But there is another minority who still view it as not genuine at all, and therefore they feel like staying out of it.
OK, let's have a look at some economic realities on the ground. Compared to Zimbabwe, South Africa's per capita GDP is about 10 times bigger, and that's clearly why so many Zimbabweans want to cross the border. But South Africa has been suffering its own economic problems. A third of its population lives on just $2 a day or less. And although the economy has grown by an annual 5% for the past 5 years, that growth hasn't created a lot of jobs. Unemployment remains high at about 23%. And that figure's higher among the majority black population, where around a third are without work. Daniel, we saw a couple of years ago these xenophobic attacks where migrants, minority populations were attacked by people in South Africa who feared they were taking their jobs. I mean, is that tension still there?
It certainly seems to be evident. And if we look back to the build-up to the World Cup this year, perhaps I can use that as an example. The discourse around the World Cup was it was Africa's World Cup, a sense of Pan-Africanism, a return to the discourses of anti-apartheid movement solidarity and the discourse of the African Renaissance. During the World Cup, I was talking to some Zimbabwean colleagues in Johannesburg, and they were at that stage putting in place emergency plans to get out of South Africa following the World Cup due to their fear of the popular discourse and popular ideas.
Yeah, I read about this. I read that that border crossings were absolutely jam-packed with people trying to get out of South Africa for the very reasons that you're mentioning, and obviously not just Zimbabweans, but other African nations, Congolese, Ethiopians.
No, that's indeed the case, and it seems to be very much of a popular perception of immigrant populations stealing jobs, stealing in general crime, and that's to do with the sensationalisation of a dangerous other, which is a very worrying trend. We see it around the world. What's interesting is that a lot of academic literature on migration to South Africa points to the economic benefits that migrants bring to a country. Now, there's some work done a few years ago by the Southern African Migration Project, and they pointed to the creation of jobs specifically in the informal sector through the arrival of migrants from Zimbabwe and elsewhere. Now, that is hidden in terms of the official figures on the economy because it happens within the informal economy, which is the main driver of the economy in large parts of the South African economic sector.
Okay.
So it's trying to understand that difference between the official and the informal sectors to an extent.
OK, Daniel, sorry to interrupt you there, but we have got the line to Shadrach back. So I'm going to come to Shadrach. I'm sorry we're having problems with the audio to you, Shadrach. But what do you make of this, the whole process of making Zimbabweans apply for legal status? And do you foresee any problems with them becoming integrated into South Africa?
Well, I think it is very important to underline the fact that if South Africa is not a banana republic, it ought to know the immigrants in the country. There's nothing wrong with that. And so far, as you have already been indicating, and this has been going on for long, people estimate between several thousands of people to 3 million. Now, we don't know the exact number. Since this week, when they started coming out openly to line up, it does appear that we are dealing with a population of undocumented people who are at least about 1 million, if not more. The number, you know, on the queues and so on is staggering. Now, you need to know that so that you are able to see whether you provide shelter, school competition for their children to go to school, health services, and so on. So for South Africa, it is imperative for good reasons. But of course, they're the other side of the coin, that you also need to know the number of people and get them documented so that you are able to combat crime, but also human security and national security
but the Zimbabweans who fail to get documentation,
it was a necessary exercise.
The Zimbabweans who fail to get documentation, either because they don't want to or because they simply can't, are hardly going to line up at the border and wait to be taken back. I mean, at some point, a deportation exercise is going to begin. What do you foresee at that point?
Well, what we have understood from the authorities so far is basically that this process of whether or not there are going to be any deportations of those who would not have documented themselves and legalized their stay in the country will only be considered from around April next year. So we are not dealing with that right now. I think right now the question is to have capacity to register, because the number of people who have come out is just outstanding. And I think that is the challenge to the South African authorities, to do it correctly. The intention, I don't think, is for deporting people, but ensuring that they are properly documented. Those who are not, they really don't have an excuse why they shouldn't really get documented and to be known to be in the country. And for Zimbabwe also, where the problem really is, the root cause of the problem, that country also ought to be asked to begin to have a plan on how to begin to absorb its population back. We can't have politicians who are simply fighting over power, but are not really taking care of their citizens, because it's a duty of the state to be able to take care of its citizens. So I think that the South African part, the documentation is important both for what I've already mentioned, but also it is a process where they begin to discuss with Zimbabwe so that Zimbabwean politicians take responsibility.
Okay, well, let's look at that issue of discussion between Zimbabwe and South Africa, because Zimbabwe's movement for democratic change has accused Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF party of deliberately hindering this whole visa process by making it difficult for Zimbabweans to get passports. MDC spokesman Sibanengi Dube said, "We are actually dismayed by the lukewarm attitude of the Zimbabwe government towards its citizens. They should be assisting, but they're throwing spanners in the project." Michael, how do you think the Zimbabwe government views this exercise?
I think I agree with Mr. Dube's assertion. And I would like to add on and say that ever since this process started, we have been seeing appalling conditions, appalling situations in that area. And we are also demanding answers. But what is also puzzling us is the fact that why couldn't there be given time between the South African government and the Zimbabwean government? Why didn't they talk about this beforehand and discuss the logistics on the ground and then agree whether they have the capacity to handle this?
Well, that's a good question. Why don't we put that to Shadrach? I mean, because you were saying that the South African government is doing the right thing, but have they done it in the right way? They only mentioned in September that they were going to start deportation. So actually, these people have had, what, 3 months?
They have had 3 months, but I don't think that they said they would start deportation. They said they would like to register the people first. What one could probably say is that a period of about a week or 10 days to allow people to register is not
well, the South African government has categorically said if you're not registered, you will be asked to leave South Africa. You'll be forced to leave South Africa.
I don't think so, because really so far it hasn't been possible for South African government really to deport Zimbabweans, and for those Zimbabweans to remain in Zimbabwe. It has been a porous border where, maybe a revolving door, where a lot of people are taken to Zimbabwe within a week or two, they are back in South Africa. So I think this needs proper management, and the intentions, which are positive, ought to be explained to Zimbabweans. But also it is important for South Africa to really begin to engage with the Zimbabwean, to ask them to take responsibility. I think that the Zimbabwean government is making it even more difficult for South Africa to register and to document those who are in this country, because it takes two to tango. They need documents from Zimbabwe, IDs, they need passports, they do need even birth certificates and so on. And that is the responsibility of the Zimbabwe government. South Africa cannot manufacture this document. So I believe that, yes, the failing of the state in Zimbabwe, because of the, really irresponsible governance that is going on in that country, is making it very difficult for its citizens, first of all, for South Africa second, but also for the region as a whole and for Africa. We are becoming a laughing stock if we take this collective responsibility as Africa. We cannot have governments that do not care about their citizens. Let
me bring Daniel in on that point, because I saw you nodding there, Daniel. I mean, this idea of putting pressure on Zimbabwe to make conditions better for their people. Well, to be fair, that is what people like Thabo Mbeki and other African organisations like SADC have been trying to do for a long time now.
No, indeed, Thabo Mbeki's so-called quiet diplomacy was a mainstay of his foreign policy for many years, and we've seen very little progress in that regard, many would argue. I was really nodding at the fact that this question of the shared responsibility or collective responsibility to tackling issues, and really driving at the idea of regional development. South Africa remains the main economic powerhouse in southern, if not sub-Saharan Africa, and until other countries are able to develop economic and social opportunities, such as Zimbabwe was doing in the 1980s, then South Africa will remain a key destination for many migrants based upon the opportunities offered there. And it's really a way of thinking, how do we facilitate people or economic development in many different countries? If you speak to a lot of Zimbabwean migrants in South Africa and in the UK, many of them speak of wanting to return home when the conditions will allow them to do so.
Last quick word to Michael on that point.
Social things and political.
Do Zimbabweans hope to return home one day? Very quick answer from you, Michael.
Most people do not intend to go back to Zim for economical and political reasons. So most people would prefer to continue to stay in South Africa legally or illegally.
OK, that was succinct and to the point. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Shadrach Gutto, Daniel Hammett and Michael Nyam-areb-vu, thank you all very much indeed. And if you have any comments about today's show, do email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For the moment, from me and the whole team here, bye-bye and Happy New Year.